The divorce papers had been signed for 11 months when my ex-wife called to tell me she had found the unopened letter I wrote on the morning she left. By the time I reached the old house, she was sitting on the front steps in the bright afternoon sun, holding those folded pages against her chest as though they were the only thing keeping her heart from breaking. Her eyes were red, her hands were trembling, and before I could ask what had happened, she looked at me and said, "Were you ever afraid of losing me?" I had imagined 1,000 ways our marriage might finally end, but I had never prepared myself for that question. I stood there beneath the clear blue sky, staring at the woman I had loved for 14 years, and answered with the truth that had ruined us because I had never known how to say it aloud. "Always," I said. "Even now." Before we continue, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel if you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances, because sometimes the people who seem the strongest are quietly carrying fears they never learned how to explain. Her name was Maren Caldwell, and when I first met her, she was 26, standing in the middle of a crowded community art fair with a broken display table and a dozen framed photographs sliding toward the pavement. I caught the largest frame before it fell. She laughed from pure relief, and by the end of that sunny Saturday, I had helped her rebuild the entire booth. Maren photographed ordinary things people rarely stop to notice: weathered hands, empty playground swings, sunlight crossing kitchen floors, old couples sharing sandwiches on park benches. She believed every life held one honest moment worth remembering. I was 30, recently promoted at a construction management company, and skilled at solving every problem except the ones inside me. My father had disappeared when I was 9, leaving behind unpaid bills, unanswered questions, and a mother who worked herself sick pretending we were fine. I grew up believing love was temporary, security was fragile, and anyone I needed would eventually discover they could live more easily without me. Maren saw my quietness as steadiness. She mistook my caution for patience. For years, I mistook her loyalty for proof that my fears were unreasonable. We built a life in a pale yellow house outside Portland, Maine, where the windows faced a small garden and the kitchen always smelled faintly of coffee and cedar. We had a daughter named Tessa, who inherited Maren's curiosity and my habit of studying a room before speaking. For a while, our marriage was full of simple happiness. We took morning walks along the harbor, ate lunch on the back steps, and spent bright Sundays repairing old furniture we found at roadside sales. Yet even during those years, fear lived quietly beneath everything I loved. When Maren traveled for photography assignments, I imagined accidents, betrayals, or sudden realizations that she had outgrown me. When she laughed with someone more charming, I felt an ache I was ashamed to admit. When she suggested changing careers or moving somewhere new, I heard danger instead of possibility. I never accused her directly. I did something more confusing. I withdrew. I became careful, distant, and overly practical. I questioned expenses, avoided difficult conversations, and convinced myself that keeping life controlled would keep our family safe. Maren asked me many times what I was afraid of. I always said nothing. The beginning of our ending arrived on a clear spring morning when Maren was offered a year-long position documenting coastal communities throughout New England. It was the opportunity she had worked toward for more than a decade. The job would not require us to move, but she would travel several days each month. She came into the kitchen glowing with hope, carrying the offer letter as though it were sunlight in her hands. Tessa, then 12, danced around the table and declared that her mother was finally going to become famous. I smiled, congratulated her, and then spent the rest of breakfast asking about schedules, insurance, missed school events, vehicle mileage, and whether the organization could cancel the contract without warning. With each practical question, Maren's excitement dimmed. She finally asked whether I was proud of her. I said of course I was, but my voice sounded like I was approving a business proposal. What I wanted to say was that I was terrified she would enter a bigger world and realize our life had become too small. Instead, I made her feel selfish for wanting something meaningful. The job changed nothing about Maren's devotion, but it exposed the distance between us. She called from every assignment. She returned with gifts for Tessa and stories she tried to share with me over breakfast or afternoon coffee. I listened while answering work emails. I asked questions without looking up. When she spoke about the people she photographed, especially a widowed boat builder named Graham who had rebuilt his life after losing his wife, jealousy twisted through me. Graham was nearly 70, but fear does not care about reason. I began checking Marin's schedule, asking when she would return, and making cold remarks about how much she seemed to enjoy being away. She did not become angry at first. She became sad. That was worse. She told me she felt as though she had to shrink herself to make me comfortable. I replied that marriage required sacrifice. She asked what I had sacrificed. The question struck a place in me that was already wounded, and rather than answer honestly, I said I had sacrificed peace by always worrying about whether she would come home. Marin stood in the kitchen beneath the bright window and stared at me as though she had finally understood something terrible. She said she had always come home, but I had never truly welcomed her back. I told her she was exaggerating. She reminded me of cancelled dinners, unfinished conversations, birthdays I spent distracted by work, and every time she reached for me only to feel me become rigid with unnamed suspicion. She said she had spent years proving she loved me, but I kept treating her love like a temporary loan. Tessa heard part of that argument from the hallway. She did not cry or shout. She simply walked outside and sat in the garden until Marin joined her. I watched them through the window, mother and daughter holding hands in the afternoon light, and I knew I should go to them. Instead, shame kept me frozen. My greatest fear was losing my family, yet every choice I made was pushing them farther away. 2 weeks later, Marin packed a suitcase and moved into her sister's guest room. She said she was not leaving because she had stopped loving me. She was leaving because loving me had begun to feel like standing trial for a crime she had never committed. I followed her from room to room, offering plans, promises, and schedules. I suggested counseling, fewer work trips, shared calendars, and weekly dinners. She listened quietly and asked why none of those ideas had mattered before she packed. I had no answer that did not expose how deeply I had taken her for granted. On the morning she left, sunlight filled our bedroom while I sat on the floor beside the half-empty closet. I wrote her a letter because speaking had failed me. I wrote that I had been afraid from the moment I loved her. I wrote that every happiness felt temporary because my childhood had taught me departures came without warning. I wrote that controlling our life had been my foolish attempt to prevent abandonment. Then pride stopped me from giving it to her. I folded the letter, placed it behind a drawer in her old desk, and watched her drive away. The divorce was quiet, which somehow made it more painful. We divided furniture, savings, holidays, and memories with careful politeness. Tessa spent alternating weeks between us but gradually chose to stay more often with Marin. I told myself it was because her school was closer. The truth was that my house felt like a museum dedicated to everything I had failed to protect. I began therapy, not to win Marin back, because by then she had made it clear she needed freedom from my expectations, but because Tessa deserved a father who could name his emotions without making them someone else's responsibility. In those sessions, I learned that fear often disguises itself as anger, criticism, control, or silence. I learned that I had confused being needed with being loved. I learned that asking someone to constantly reassure you can slowly convince them that their love will never be enough. The lessons were painful, but they changed me. I apologized to Tessa without explaining away my behavior. I listened when she said our arguments had made her feel responsible for keeping the family calm. I told her she had never been responsible for saving us. Months passed. Marin completed her coastal photography project, and one of her portraits was selected for a regional exhibition. I attended the opening on a bright Saturday afternoon but stayed near the back, unsure whether my presence would feel supportive or intrusive. The central photograph showed an elderly man standing beside an unfinished wooden boat, one hand resting on the hull and his face turned toward the sea. The title was Still Building. Beneath it, Marin had written that grief did not always mean something had ended, sometimes it meant love had left behind work worth continuing. I stared at those words until my vision blurred. Tessa found me there and quietly slipped her hand into mine. She told me her mother knew I had come. I asked whether Marin wanted me to leave. Tessa said no, but she did not want me to turn the moment into something it was not. That sentence revealed how much older our daughter had become while we were busy breaking apart. That I congratulated Marin near the gallery windows. She looked radiant, not because she was free of pain, but because she had stopped apologizing for taking up space. I told her the exhibition was extraordinary. She thanked me and said she had heard from Tessa that therapy was helping. I admitted it was. For a few minutes, we spoke like two people who had once known everything about each other and were now learning how to be kind with what remained. Then a tall man named Everett approached and handed Marin a cup of coffee. He was a curator from Boston, warm and confident, and the ease between them struck me with an old, familiar panic. Yet this time I did not withdraw or make a cutting remark. I shook his hand, thanked Marin again, and stepped away. Outside, beneath the clean afternoon sky, I let myself feel the fear without turning it into punishment. It hurt, but it passed. That was the first moment I understood that healing did not mean becoming fearless. It meant refusing to let fear decide who you became. Nearly a year after the divorce, Marin called because she was preparing to sell the yellow house. During the separation, she had kept it so Tessa would have one familiar home, but Tessa was preparing for college, and the place had become too heavy with history. Marin asked whether I wanted to collect anything from the desk in her former studio. That was how she discovered the letter. When I arrived, she had already read it twice. The front door stood open to the warm afternoon air. Dust floated through beams of sunlight, and half-packed boxes lined the hallway. We sat on the steps where we had once taught Tessa to tie her shoes. Marin said the letter had given words to everything she had spent years trying to understand. Then she asked the question that broke through every defense I had left. Were you ever afraid of losing me? My answer, always even now, came without calculation. For once, I did not try to sound strong. She looked down at the letter and said the tragedy was not that I had been afraid. It was that I had made her live inside my fear without telling her its name. I nodded because there was nothing to defend. I told her she had deserved trust, warmth, and a husband who celebrated her dreams without treating them as threats. I apologized for making her responsible for wounds she had not caused. Marin began to cry, but she did not move closer. I understood that tears were not an invitation. Forgiveness was not reconciliation, and remorse did not create a debt she had to repay. She said she had forgiven me slowly, not because the past no longer mattered, but because she no longer wanted to carry anger into the future. She also admitted that she had made mistakes. She had sometimes hidden her unhappiness until it became resentment. She had expected me to understand feelings she had stopped expressing clearly. But she said those mistakes did not make us equally responsible for every wound. I agreed. Then came the unexpected turn. Marin told me Everett had asked her to move to Boston and build a life with him. She cared for him deeply, but she had not answered because part of her still felt tied to the version of us that might have survived if I had given her the letter in time. My heart tightened, yet I knew this was the test of everything I had learned. The old version of me would have searched for hope in her hesitation. He would have interpreted her uncertainty as an opening and used our history to pull her backward. Instead, I told her the letter was not proof that we should have remained married. It was proof that I had loved her badly because I had not learned how to love without fear. I said she should not choose me, Everett, or anyone else out of guilt. She should choose the life in which she felt most honest, most peaceful, and most herself. Marin stared at me for a long time, and then she smiled through her tears. She said that was the first truly selfless thing I had ever said about losing her. We spent the rest of the afternoon packing the studio. We found Tessa's childhood drawings, ticket stubs from our first vacation, and the broken wooden frame from the art fair where we met. Some memories made us laugh. Others forced us into silence. By late afternoon, the the room was empty except for the desk and 2 chairs. Marin decided to move to Boston, not because Everett had rescued her, but because the city offered space for her work and a future she wanted to explore. I helped carry her boxes to the moving truck several weeks later. Tessa came home from college for the day, and the 3 of us ate sandwiches in the garden before saying goodbye to the house. There was sadness, but it no longer felt like failure. It felt like gratitude for something that had been real even though it had not lasted forever. Marin and I did not remarry. That is not the only shape a hopeful ending can take. She built a beautiful life in Boston, eventually marrying Everett in a small daytime ceremony overlooking the harbor. I attended with Tessa, and when Marin saw me, she crossed the terrace and hugged me without hesitation. Years earlier, that moment would have destroyed me. Instead, I felt grief, affection, and peace existing together. I later met a woman named Celeste Rowan, a school counselor with a quiet laugh and no interest in pretending either of us came without scars. On our 3rd date, when she asked what frightened me most about relationships, I did not say nothing. I told her the truth. I said I feared being left, becoming controlling, and repeating old mistakes. She did not promise never to leave. She promised to be honest. I realized honesty was stronger than reassurance because it asked both people to remain present, not perfect. The last time Marin and I spoke about our marriage, we were sitting in the sun outside Tessa's college graduation. Families crowded the lawn, cameras flashed, and our daughter stood among her classmates with confidence neither of us had possessed at her age. Marin asked whether I still feared losing people. I said yes, but fear no longer made my decisions. She squeezed my hand and told me she was proud of the man I had become. I told her I was sorry she had paid such a painful price for that growth. She answered that healing does not erase consequences, but it can keep them from becoming meaningless. Then Tessa ran toward us, laughing, and we stood together for a photograph not as a restored couple, but as a family transformed by truth. Before this story ends, please leave a meaningful comment about what you believe love needs most to survive: trust, honesty, forgiveness, courage, or something else you have learned through your own life. Sometimes the lesson is not that every broken relationship should be repaired. Sometimes the lesson is that people can take responsibility, change deeply, and stop passing their pain to those who love them. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. That I once believed losing Marin would be the worst thing that could happen to me. In truth, the worst thing had already happened long before she left. I had allowed fear to stand between us while calling it love. Losing her forced me to see that clearly. I could not change the ending of our marriage, but I could honor what it taught me. I could become a safer father, a more honest partner, and a man who no longer punished people for the possibility that they might someday leave. Marin was not the woman I won back. She was the woman I finally learned to release with gratitude. And in letting her go without bitterness, I discovered something I had spent my entire life searching for: love does not become meaningless simply because it changes shape. Sometimes its final gift is not reunion. Sometimes its final gift is teaching us how to love the next person and ourselves without fear.